What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Motorfest. So I did have another idea when it does come to the events here in the game, but who knows, maybe some of them might actually be making their appearance in the future. Now, we do know in this game we of course do have like the point-to-point style of events here, like the lovely peak performance. We also have something like the Elite Nation, which of course you then start and then head to the other part of that said area, which of course is going to be like 0 to 100%, but a question I did have though is for these circuit events like the GP Glory over here, we also have other circuit races like the Stock Around the Clock and also the Tallahassee Melee here on the right. Now my question is though, what if we actually had a way to make these races last longer? We all do know basically every event here on the bottom part of the racetrack is going to be a circuit. But the question is though, guys, what if we could make all the events last a lot longer? Like for example, instead of having like these events being 5 laps, maybe you can make them 10 or even something like even 15 laps to make them more interesting, or like maybe doing that you would then make a lot more money and XP and also get more parts from them. Like imagine being able to increase the laps of every single circuit event around the entire map in Motorfest. Like I would say the best way to do that is to most likely at least give you the option to do so. And that way if you don't actually want to do like 10 or 15 laps around these said events, you could of course do like the regular one for around 3 laps or so, but being able to do a lot more laps around the events I would say is going to be insanely fun, not only because you will actually get more money and parts from those, but of course you can also race for a lot longer in those set events if you do enjoy them. For example, guys, heading over to one of my favorite circuit races in this game, the GP Glory here is going to be a pretty long race no matter what vehicle you actually pick. I would even say it's probably going to be one of the longer events in the game. Of course, right now it is going to give you around 26,000 XP and $40,000. Now, what if there was a thing to where you could actually double the amount of laps you could do? So instead of doing 2, you can actually stay in the event and do like 4, or even increase that one to like 6. Do keep in mind that would also give you a lot more money by doing so. So for example, guys, on 4 laps, you would then get $80,000 and 50,000 XP. And of course, if you did 6 laps, you would get like 70,000 and like $120,000. But if you did have the option to increase the number of laps in those events, I feel like that would be a very cool thing to do, at least for these circuit events themselves. Now, of course, I have to admit though, what if they actually did something to where it was going to be like a separate style of that event, to where it was basically going to be called like the Endurance or something like that, where every event that is going to be part of the circuit style can then fall into like the category of the Endurance, to where you would basically make a lot more money and XP, but also get a lot more parts to drop from the events being a lot longer than before. But of course they are going to be an endurance, so you are going to be doing a lot more laps, most likely doubled compared to before. Like for example, every single event that was going to be 5 laps before this is now going to be around 10 to 12 laps afterwards. And then of course having like a longer race being around 2 laps is now going to be 4. Or maybe you can actually pick like 6 or even 8 laps on that said event if you did actually want to do that race a lot longer. I would say having the option to at least change that would be insanely cool to actually be able to do. Like for example, let's take an event like the Stock Around the Clock, where that event is going to be around 5 laps on average to actually do it. Of course only taking around less than 2 minutes with almost every class in the game. What if you can actually make that race last around 15 to 20 laps instead? Of course it is probably going to take around like 4 to 5 minutes to do it, but if you were to grind that out though, guys, you could obviously get a lot more parts from that. And of course you get a lot more money and XP. Like, I do feel like having this option would also be insanely good for like grinding out these style of races. A good example of this is when I was grinding out the Demolition Derby cars and many of the monster trucks, I was actually doing the Stock Around the Clock often, and I was pretty much grinding that race out a lot. Now, I do know it was 5 laps before, and of course it is right now because, you know, there's no endurance part. But if it was going to be 15 to 20 laps, imagine getting around double the parts you did before. Or, of course, if it was 20 laps, that's going to be 4 times the amount of parts you would get. And on the flip side of that, you're also going to be doing around 20 laps, which in return does make the event that much longer than before, which of course is going to get you that many more parts actually dropping from it. So I would say it's probably going to be a win-win, especially if you are grinding them out. Like, if this was an option back then when I was grinding out my vehicle classes, I would have definitely increased the amount of laps I could have did. That way I could of course get more money, XP, and parts from them. I mean, if you are grinding out the exact same event, why not do a bunch of laps on that one? Instead of doing like 2 laps around the event, of course restarting that said race around 15 to 20 times. At least then doing around 8 laps in a said event is most likely going to be a way better option, especially if you are most likely going to be grinding out these said events over and over to actually get the parts that you are looking for. So I would say, guys, having it being this way is going to be much better. Now, I have to admit, though, maybe having this in a separate category called Endurance is probably going to be the best way to actually separate the entire thing that way. And you also don't have to worry about making the entire system that much more complicated. Like, if you could do all of this in the difficulty options in the menu, that would most likely make the entire thing kind of confusing, but also a bit annoying to navigate. So I would say, though, that's probably going to be the best way to do this. That way the events are indeed going to be, like, separate. And you also can do, like, an endurance race if you want to, but you also have the option of doing, like, the regular events in the game as well. And they're not going to be overlapping and basically making it insanely complicated for basically everything. What's also kind of funny about this, though, is I do remember back in the day playing Need for Speed Shift and always doing the endurance races back then. I actually remember one of my favorite races in that game, guys, was the Figure 8, which of course also took around like 30 laps to actually do it. And the biggest challenge in that race was probably not crashing at all. Imagine having like a 30-lap Figure 8 event in Motorfest. Like, that would be the funniest thing ever. And I would even say, guys, imagine having an event like that in PvP as well. Like, imagine having like a Figure 8 style of an event in PvP being around 20 laps. That would probably be the most hectic event in gaming ever, and I would probably say so many people would most likely like that, but I would like to know your thoughts on this, though, because I do feel like being able to increase the amount of laps in a circuit event is probably going to be a very positive change overall, but at the same time, guys, having like an endurance style of like a category is not only going to make this separate, but also less complicated.